It is a bright autumn afternoon in Paris in the year 1901, and you are standing in a crowd with your neck bent all the way back, staring at the sky. Everyone around you is doing the same. Ladies in enormous hats, gentlemen with their canes, waiters who have wandered out of the cafes still holding their trays, all of them frozen, all of them looking up. Because up there, impossibly against the blue, a machine is flying. Not a bird, not a kite. A long yellow airship, shaped like a great fat cigar with a little basket slung beneath it and a small man standing in that basket in a straw boater hat, calm as you please, steering the thing with his own two hands. He is circling the Eiffel Tower. He is coming back. And when he lands, the whole city is going to lose its mind. You would assume, watching this, that the little man in the basket is French. He is the toast of Paris, after all. His name is in every newspaper. Children are named after him. And yet the man up there, the man about to become the most famous aviator on earth, was not French at all. He was Brazilian. And his story is one of the strangest, most beautiful, and in the end most heartbreaking stories that my country has ever produced. So let me tell it to you properly. Pull up a chair. My name is Joaquim, and for the better part of 40 years I stood at the front of a classroom in Brazil trying to convince teenagers that history is not a list of dates to be survived, but a room full of people as real and as foolish and as brave as they are. I am retired now, mostly, though a teacher never really retires. We just find new people to talk at, and of all the stories I ever told in that classroom, there is one I always saved for the days when the class had gone a little sleepy, because it wakes everyone up. It is the story of a man named Alberto Santos-Dumont. In Brazil, we do not really call him that. We just say Santos-Dumont. And every child knows the name the way an American child knows the Wright brothers, which, as it happens, is exactly where this story is going to get interesting and a little uncomfortable. And I promise you I am going to be honest with you the whole way through, even the parts where honesty costs my country something, because that is the deal I make with a story. So, let us begin where he began. Alberto was born in 1873, deep in the interior of Brazil, into what I can only describe as an ocean of coffee. His father was an engineer who had built one of the largest and most modern coffee plantations in the whole country, thousands upon thousands of acres, its own railway lines running through it, a small kingdom of red earth and green bushes and dark beans. They called his father the Coffee King, and that made little Alberto, quite literally, a coffee prince. Now, most boys born into that kind of money grow up to do very little with it, and there is no shame in that, I suppose, though it makes for a dull class. But Alberto was a peculiar child, in the best way. He was small, he would be a small man all his life, barely more than 100 pounds soaking wet, and he was quiet, and he was absolutely, hopelessly obsessed with machines. On the plantation there were engines everywhere, the locomotives that hauled the coffee, the machinery that processed it. And while the other children played, little Alberto was underneath the machines, inside the machines, learning how every gear and valve and piston did its work. He drove the plantation locomotives before he was a teenager. He read Jules Verne, the science fiction of the age, all submarines and voyages to the moon, and he read it not as fantasy, but as a to-do list. Here is a thing I want you to hold on to because it matters for everything that comes later. This was a boy who looked at the machine and did not see a way to get rich. His family was already rich. He saw, instead, a kind of magic that ought to be shared. Keep that in your pocket. We will need it at the end. When Alberto was a young man, his father's health failed, and the family sold up much of the coffee empire, and his father did something that changed the history of the world without meaning to. He handed his son a fortune, and he told him, more or less, go to Paris and become a man of science. Go and learn everything. So picture him arriving in Paris in the 1890s, this small, elegant, immensely wealthy young Brazilian stepping off the train into the most exciting city on the face of the earth. They called it the Belle Époque, the beautiful age. Electric lights were coming on. The motor car was brand new. The Eiffel Tower had just gone up, and half of Paris still thought it was hideous. And everywhere there was this feeling, a feeling I think we have almost lost, that the future was arriving right now, this afternoon, and that a clever person with courage and money might simply reach up and grab a piece of it. And Alberto looked up, the way he always did, and he saw the one thing no human being had ever truly mastered. The sky. He decided, this delicate young man who could have spent his life at the opera and the racetrack, that he was going to learn to fly, not in dreams, in a machine, with his own hands on the controls. He started, as many did in those years, with balloons. He went up in his first hot air balloon and was so enchanted that he had one built to his own design, a tiny thing, the smallest anyone had made. But a balloon has a terrible flaw, and Alberto saw it at once. A balloon goes where the wind goes. You are a passenger of the weather. You cannot steer. And Alberto did not want to drift. He wanted to go somewhere and come back and choose the route himself. So he set about building what they called a dirigible, from the French to direct, to steer, an airship. Take the lighter-than-air gas that lifts a balloon, stretch it into that long cigar shape so it can cut through the air, hang a basket underneath, and here is the leap. Bolt on a petrol engine, the same kind of noisy, temperamental, brand-new engine that was just beginning to appear in motor cars, and drive a propeller with it. Now you can go against the wind. Now you can steer. He built them one after another, numbering them no. 1 no, 2 no, 3 and on, and he crashed a fair few of them because this was genuinely dangerous work. He hit rooftops. He came down in trees. There is a wonderful and completely true story of Santos-Dumont dangling from the side of a grand Paris hotel, his airship tangled and deflating, waiting to be rescued, and reportedly having lunch sent up to him on a rope while he waited. That was the man, nearly killed and thinking about lunch. Paris fell in love with him. He was small and brave and rich and foreign and impeccably dressed, and he flew his impossible machines low over the city where everyone could see, sometimes puttering down the boulevards at rooftop height and mooring his airship outside a cafe to have a coffee. He became, and I do not think this is an exaggeration, one of the most famous human beings alive, and I want you to understand what a strange kind of fame it was, because it was not the fame of a general or a king. It was the fame of a man who made the impossible look like fun. He dined at the finest tables in the city. He wore high starched collars and beautiful suits, and he set fashion simply by existing. Elegant Paris ladies took to carrying little brooches and pins shaped like his airship. Society hostesses begged him to come to dinner, and he did all of this while regularly risking his life in a flimsy gas bag over the rooftops, a daredevil in a dinner jacket, a scientist who was also, unmistakably, a showman. He understood something that many great inventors never grasp, that if you want the public to believe in the future, you must let them watch you touch it. And that brings us back to that autumn afternoon and the crowd and your bent neck, because a wealthy patron of aviation had put up a prize, the Deutsch Prize, a large sum of money for the first person who could fly an airship from a particular park on the edge of Paris, called St. Cloud, around the Eiffel Tower and back, and do the whole round trip in under 30 minutes. It sounds simple when I say it quickly. It was anything but. The wind, the fragile engine, the sheer distance, many said it could not be done. In 1901, in his airship No. 6, Santos-Dumont did it. He rose from St. Cloud, he pushed his little engine as hard as it would go, he rounded the great iron tower, and he brought the ship home. There was some argument about the exact time, whether he had made the limit by seconds. The committee fussed over it, but the people of Paris had no patience for the fussing. They had watched him do it with their own eyes. They roared, and Santos-Dumont, in a gesture that tells you everything about him, took a large part of that prize money and gave it away to the poor of Paris, and gave another part to his own workmen, the mechanics who had built the ship. So by the age of 28, the coffee prince from Brazil was the undisputed king of the air. But here is the thing. The airship was not the real dream. Steering a bag of gas was a marvel, yes, but it was still, at heart, a balloon with an engine. The true prize, the thing that had eluded every dreamer since Leonardo, was heavier than air flight. A machine with wings, heavier than the air it flew through, that could lift itself off the ground by sheer speed and power and stay up. And Santos-Dumont, restless as ever, turned his whole mind to that. What he built next looks, to our eyes, absolutely absurd. If I showed you a photograph, you would laugh, and that is all right because it is a little funny. Imagine a series of big box kites bolted together into wings, and then imagine the whole flimsy contraption flying backwards. That is to say, with the little wing and the steering out in front, and the engine and propeller pushing from behind, and the pilot standing upright in a basket in the middle like a man in a hot air balloon who has wandered into the wrong invention. They called it the 14 bis because he first tested it slung underneath one of his airships, No. 14, before it ever flew on its own. This kind of design, with the small forward wing leading the way, engineers call a canard, the French word for duck, because of the way it seems to stick its neck out in front. It was ungainly. It was, frankly, not a very good airplane, but watch what it did. On the 23rd of October, 1906, on a field just outside Paris called Bagatelle, in front of a crowd, in front of officials, in front of the newspapers, Santos-Dumont ran that ugly machine along the grass on its own wheels, and it lifted briefly into the air. A short hop, a few seconds, a handful of meters, but it lifted under its own power, and it came down, and everyone there saw it. And then, a few weeks later, on the 12th of November, 1906, he did it properly. He flew the 14 bis about 220 meters, staying up for over 20 seconds in front of the official observers of the Aéro Club de France. And for that flight, the Aéro Club awarded him the prize for the first officially observed powered flight in Europe. Europe went, once again, completely mad for him. The little Brazilian had done it again. He had, as far as Paris was concerned, invented the airplane. Now I have called the 14 bis ugly, and I stand by it, but I want to be fair to that ridiculous machine, because it was doing something profoundly difficult. Nobody in Europe had a proven working airplane that anyone had actually watched fly. The Wrights, across the ocean, had one, but Europe did not yet believe them and could not see them. So when this odd duck of a machine hauled itself off the grass at Bagatelle by its own power, in front of everybody, it was not just a stunt. It was a proof of concept delivered in public, to a continent that was starving for exactly that proof. It lit a fire. Within a few short years, all across France and Britain and beyond, dozens of new builders were racing into the sky, and the whole European age of aviation caught a light from the spark he had so publicly struck. Whatever you decide about who was first, that much is not in dispute. He was the man who made Europe believe. And now we come to the hard part, the part where I have to be a historian and not a proud Brazilian. And believe me, my friend, those two things are wrestling in my chest as I say this. Because you, if you grew up in the United States, learned a different name for the man who invented the airplane. You learned Wilbur and Orville Wright, two brothers, bicycle makers from Ohio, on a windy beach at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And you learned a date, the 17th of December, 1903. So let me put the two things side by side plainly, and let me not cheat, because a story you cheat at is not worth telling. The Wright brothers flew first. That is the truth, and I am not going to dance around it to make my countrymen look better. In December of 1903, 3 full years before the 14 bis ever left the grass at Bagatelle, the Wright flyer lifted off at Kitty Hawk with Orville aboard, and it flew. First in time. Full stop. If the only question is who got a powered, heavier-than-air machine into the sky earliest, the answer is the Wright brothers, and it is not particularly close, and any honest person in Brazil or anywhere else has to say so. So why does Brazil to this day teach its children that Santos-Dumont was the father of aviation? Why do many Brazilians still insist that his was the first true flight? Are they simply wrong? Are they just being stubborn and patriotic? Well, here is where it stops being about dates and starts being about something much more interesting, what you count as flying. Because the argument, when you actually listen to it, is not really about who was first. It is about what the word first should even mean. The Brazilian case rests on two things, and I want you to weigh them fairly. The first is witness. The Wright brothers, being cautious, private, deeply protective men, and I will come to why they were so protective in a moment, did their early flying largely away from crowds. For years afterward there were people, even serious people, in Europe and America both, who genuinely doubted the Wrights had done what they claimed, simply because so few outsiders had seen it. Santos-Dumont, by glorious contrast, flew the 14 bis in broad daylight, on a public field, in front of the official observers of the Aéro Club de France, with cameras and reporters and a crowd. It was witnessed. It was documented. It was official. If your standard for first flight is the first flight the world could actually verify as it happened, then a Brazilian argument starts to breathe. The second point is the one the engineers really care about, and it is genuinely important. It is about how the machine got into the air. The Wright flyer in those early years took off from a rail, a wooden launching track, and they frequently used a catapult, a falling weight on a derrick, to fling the machine up to flying speed. And they usually flew into a stiff headwind off the sea, which helps a wing bite the air. None of that is cheating. Mind you, it was clever and it worked. But you can ask a fair question about it. Did the machine truly fly under its own power alone, or did it need a helping shove and a helping wind to get up? The 14 bis had no rail, no catapult, no launching wind. It sat on its own wheels on flat ground, and it used nothing but its own engine to gather speed and haul itself into the air. An unaided takeoff. And to a great many people then and now, that a machine rising off level ground by its own power, with the world watching, is what the word flight ought to mean. So here is where I landed, and I landed honestly, and I ask you to sit in the discomfort of it with me, because grown-up history is comfortable with two things being true at once. The Wright brothers were first in time. That is simply a fact. And Santos-Dumont made the first flight that was public, official, witnessed, and unaided off-level ground, that is also simply a fact. The whole 100-year quarrel between the two countries is not really a quarrel about what happened. Everyone agrees on what happened. It is a quarrel about which of those achievements deserves the crown, and that, my friend, is not a question of evidence. It is a question of values, of what you think matters most, and that is why it will never, ever be settled, because there is no scoreboard for values. I am not going to hand you a winner because the honest historian does not have one to give. What I can do is make sure you understand both men clearly enough to make up your own mind. And to understand both men, you have to understand one more thing, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on, and it takes us straight into the heart of who Santos-Dumont was. Why were the Wright brothers so secretive? Why did they fly away from crowds and guard their machine and hold their cards so close? The answer is a very reasonable, very human one. They had invented something of colossal value, and they wanted to protect it. They filed patents. They spent years of their lives in courtrooms, fighting bitter legal battles to defend their designs, to make sure that anyone who built a flying machine using their ideas would have to pay them for it. And I want to be fair to the Wrights here too, because it is easy to sneer and I will not. That is how invention normally works. That is how it is supposed to work. You make the breakthrough, you protect it, you are rewarded for it. No reasonable person can blame them. But now turn and look at Santos-Dumont, and you will see the difference that makes my throat tighten every time I teach this. Santos-Dumont refused to patent his flying machines. He refused. He published his designs openly for anyone to read, anyone to copy, anyone to improve. He wanted no royalties. He wanted no monopoly. He wanted, and he said this in his own words in his own way, for flight to belong to everyone, to be a gift to all of humanity, a new freedom for the whole human race, not a private fortune for one clever family. Now, you can call that naive. A hard-headed man of business would call it foolish, and there were surely people around him who did. He was giving away, for nothing, one of the most valuable ideas in the history of the world. But I do not think it was foolish. I think it was the single most consistent thing he ever did. Remember the boy under the machines on the coffee plantation, who looked at an engine and saw not a way to get rich. He was already rich, but a kind of magic that ought to be shared. That boy grew up and gave the sky away. He was rich enough that he did not need the money, yes, that is true. But plenty of rich men chase more money anyway. Santos-Dumont chased something else entirely. He wanted to be the man who handed the future to everyone for free. And here, before we get to the sad part, let me give you one small, delightful thing, because I never leave a class without at least one detail they will repeat at dinner. Look down at your wrist. If you are wearing a wristwatch, a watch on your wrist, on a strap, you may be able to thank Santos-Dumont for the fact that it is there at all. In those days, a gentleman kept his watch in his pocket on a chain. You pulled it out, you looked at it, you put it back, which is a perfectly fine system, unless you happen to be standing in a wobbling basket 1,000 feet over Paris with both hands white-knuckled on the controls of a flying machine, and you need to know whether you have beaten the 30-minute limit. You cannot go fishing in your waistcoat for a pocket watch up there. So Santos-Dumont went to his friend, a Paris jeweler named Louis Cartier. Yes, that Cartier, and he asked him, "Could you make me a watch I can wear on my wrist and read at a glance, hands-free, while I fly?" And Cartier did. Around 1904, he made his aviator friend a flat, square watch on a leather strap, and it was called, and is still called to this day, the Cartier Santos. It became the height of fashion, precisely because the famous aviator wore it, and it helped turn the wristwatch from an oddity into the ordinary thing on your arm right now. So the next time you glance at your wrist, you might spare a thought for a small Brazilian who simply needed both hands free to fly. And now I have to tell you how it ends, and I am going to tell you gently, the way I would want it told about someone I loved. For a while, Santos-Dumont's life was as bright as a life can be. He was famous, beloved, generous, surrounded by the wonder he had helped create. He kept designing, kept building, made a little single-seat monoplane he called the Demoiselle, the Dragonfly, and gave those plans away too. But his health began to fail him, a wasting illness that sapped the energy of that small, tireless body, and he had to give up flying himself. And then the thing happened that broke his heart, and I mean that almost literally. He had given the world the airplane as a gift, a thing of beauty, a machine to bring people and nations closer together, to shrink the world, to lift human beings into a freedom no one had ever known. That was the dream. That was the whole reason he gave it away instead of selling it. And then he watched the world take his gift and turn it into a weapon. He lived to see the airplane go to war. He saw flying machines, his flying machines, the children of everything he had built, used to drop bombs on cities, to kill men in their thousands from above, to bring a new kind of horror down out of the very sky he had loved so purely. And it destroyed him. Not his body, his spirit. He fell into a deep and lasting depression, a grief that would not lift, weighed down by the unbearable feeling that the beautiful thing he had given humanity had been twisted into a machine for killing, and that he was, somehow, responsible. He came home to Brazil, and in 1932, in a hotel by the sea, worn down by illness and by that grief he could not put down, Alberto Santos-Dumont took his own life. He was 59 years old. I will not say more about the how of it than that because he deserves his dignity, and because the how is not the point. The point is why. A gentleman who wanted only to give the world a pair of wings, broken by watching the world use those wings to fall upon itself. So, let me gather this up, because I have taken you a long way, and I want to make sure you leave with the thing that actually matters. And it is not the argument about who was first. For years I would teach this story, and my students would want, more than anything, for me to settle the fight. Was it Santos-Dumont or the Wright brothers? Give us the answer, Professor. And it took me a long time to understand that the fight over who was first is, in the end, the least interesting thing about this whole story. It is the thing the school books argue about because it is easy to argue about. It has a scoreboard shape to it, even though, as I told you, there is no real scoreboard. Here is the thing that is actually worth carrying out of this room. You live, right now, inside a world built almost entirely out of gifts you did not pay for and cannot possibly repay. The person who worked out how to keep the food from poisoning you. The one who figured out the wire that carries the voice. The quiet ones who gave away the idea instead of patenting it, who published instead of hoarding, who decided that the magic ought to be shared. You are standing, this very second, on a mountain of freely given genius, and you know almost none of their names, and you have never once thanked them because that is simply the water we all swim in. Santos-Dumont was one of those people, right out at the front of the line. He had the fortune and the fame to lock the sky behind a patent and become perhaps the richest man of his age. And he looked at that and he said, "No, let it be free. Let it belong to everyone." And then he had to watch what everyone did with it. And that, I think, is the real question this small Brazilian leaves on the table in front of you. And I want you to actually feel the weight of it, because I do, every single time. What do we owe the people who hand us the future for free? What do we owe them when we take the gift, and it is a beautiful gift, and then we do with it whatever we are going to do? I genuinely want to know what you think, and I read the comments, so tell me two things down below. First, the honest one. Knowing what you know now, the dates, the witnesses, the unaided takeoff, all of it, who do you think should wear the crown, Santos-Dumont or the Wright brothers, and why? Do not just pick your own country. Make the harder case. And second, who is a person in your own life or in history who handed you something for free that you have never properly thanked them for? I would love to read those. If you did not know this story, if you had never heard of the little Brazilian in the straw hat who flew around the Eiffel Tower and then gave the sky away, then do me a small kindness and subscribe, because there is a whole country full of stories like this one that never made it into your school book, and I intend to tell you every last one of them. My name is Joaquim. Thank you for pulling up a chair. And the next time you look up and see a plane crossing the sky, spare a thought for the gentle man who wanted it to belong to you and who never once asked you to pay.